Hi there, and welcome to this presentation where we are going to talk a little bit about activity and wellness. Obviously, it's something that you are asked to fill in on a daily basis. So we're going to go through why we actually use it, how you fill it in on your app, and how it can really benefit you to physically prepare yourself for the demanding schedule of cricket that you're going to have coming up this season. Firstly, we are going to talk about activity. So, what is activity? Put simply, it's a way of measuring how much workload you have done on a daily basis. So, what we can include in this is your batting, your bowling, your fielding, but also your S&C training, weights, running, cross training, and rehab. And under that cross training bracket is essentially any other physical training that you do, which can range from walking all the way through to playing a team sport in your own time. Next up, how do you actually record it? So on your phone, go to the JER AMS app. If you haven't downloaded it already, go and download it and log in. And then go to the top left-hand corner, press the three lines, go to assessments, and then scroll down to the bottom and you'll find icon of a cricket ball and it will say double SM activity, and click on that. So next up, this screen will come up. Did you train today? Press yes or no, and then go through each of the activities at the top using the arrows to scroll across. So batting, bowling, fielding, weights, cross training, running, and rehab. So depending on what you did that day, and if you played, press whether you played or not, and again, go through all of those questions. Depending on what you've done for that day, put in the number of minutes that you did it for each activity, and the RPE, we'll go through those, what those mean in a minute. And then when you get to the summary at the end, press submit, and then that will be sent through to us. Couple of notes on this, make sure you complete it on days even when you don't do anything, as this will go towards your activity percentage completion and your compliance. So even if you've not done anything on that day, just still go through the process of putting in your activity, and you'll just have to put 000 for everything that you've done that day, because even if you've done nothing, we want to know that, whether it mean that you should have done something and you haven't, or the fact that you should have had a rest day that day. As I mentioned earlier, cross training goes down as any other activity or sport that doesn't fall into any of the other brackets. So if it's not running, if it's not a running session, a weight session, a batting, bowling, fielding, or rehab session, it goes down as cross training. Now, the data that you have submitted into the app, RPE and minutes for each activity, that's multiplied together to give us something called arbitrary units, which is how we quantify workload. So with the RPE scale, it's a measure of intensity, so how hard was the activity that you did. And when you fill in RPE for any activity, you'll see this scale, and it's really important that you actually read what it says, because that will make a huge difference to what your activity workload number goes down for on that day. It's not a test, so we don't want you to put 10 maximal for everything. To give you a bit of a reference point, when you do your 2 kilometer time trial, you should be putting that down as a 9 or a 10. So when you're putting numbers down for this, think about how hard your muscles are working and also how hard your lungs are working. So, just to give you another reference, a batting session where you're not doing any running between the wickets might go down as a 3, 4 or 5. We understand that there is some subjectivity involved in this, so everyone's going to differ slightly, and that's the point of it as well. That's what we want to measure, but we're expecting that certain activities are going to fall within a certain range. So, your weights activities might be 6, 7, 8. Your running activities 7, 8, 9, 10. But just make sure that you actually pay attention to that scale when you're filling it in, because if it's multiplied by minutes, the difference between putting a 4 and an 8 down is huge, because that doubles or halves your activity for that day, depending on which one you put down. And then minutes is just your volume, and essentially how much did you do. And as I said, those two values will be multiplied together to provide and quantify total activity workload. To provide you with a daily example of what this might look like, I've made up some figures and some activities with how the AMS actually calculates this. So, say you do a batting session and you put it down as a RPE, that's how hard it was, as a 3, and you did it for 45 minutes. You do 3 multiplied by 45, and your activity total would be 135. Then you do a weight session, RPE of 7, do it for 60 minutes. Total workload for that is 420. 60 times 7, 420. Bike session, 8, 20. Total load, 160. Fielding, 4, 30. Total load, 120. And then you've got the afternoon off, so you go and play a round of golf. Play 9 holes, 90 minutes, RPE of 2, 180. So all of those numbers then get added together to give a total workload for the day, and for that day it's 1015. So why do we use it? Why do we use arbitrary units to calculate workload? So due to AU, arbitrary units being used, we can see how much load you have done across multiple activities. That's the beauty of the system. It doesn't need any fancy equipment. We can look at any activity you've done, and you can as well, and submit a workload for it using RPE times minutes. So if you're a golfer and you play a round of golf, you can put how long you played for and how hard it was into AMS. If surfing's your thing, you can do exactly the same, and that can be accounted for in your workload accumulation. Or, which is more likely for most of you who play team sports, if you play a sport at the weekend or you train during the week, you can include that in your activity as well. Number 2, we can ensure you are training at the desired intensity. So if we set up a running session, strength session, fielding session, or some bowling for you to do, we can look at the RPE that you put in and make sure that the intensity that we were after from that session you actually hit. So that's really valuable feedback for us. Number 3, we also know that the following cricket events / activities on average require the following workload. So we know that a 1 hour skills / S&C training session is around 240 units. A 3 hour training session, S&C / skills, is around 500 units. A 2020 game is around 750 to 1,000 units. 2 2020s in a day, which some of you will play, is 1,500 to 2,000 units. 50 over match is around 2,000 units. This is obviously very dependent on what happens in the game. Depending on how long you bat or how much you bowl or how long the game goes for, but these are some rough figures. A day in the dirt, so spending the whole day in the field, 2,000 to 3,000 units. Weekend of cricket, around 3,000 units, so that's adding those 2 days together. State challenge, which is 3 days of cricket, can look like 4,500 units, and then a national championship, so 6 days of cricket with 2 rest days. So over a 8-day period, it can add up to 6,000 units of workload. So on this graph, we've got the average weekly totals for certain months building up to January. So you can see on the bottom axis, on the bottom left hand side, you've got June all the way through to January. So this is obviously the months of the cricket season where you're going to be building up to a national championship, hopefully. And the number attributed to that month is the workload average for 7 days. So in the month of June, we're looking for an average across the 7 days of 2,500 units of work. Into July, 3,500. August, 4,000 as you start to get into a bit of cricket and play at the weekends. September, 4,500 when you start to play more cricket at weekends, plus the training you're doing in the week. Into October, this is when State Challenge normally happens, where you've got those 3 days, and then trial matches in November as you build up to December, January, where you're going to be playing 6 days of cricket in the space of 8 days. So given that we've got that historical data, we can actually use that and make sure that you're building up to those units across the season. So what we want to see is an incremental increase in fitness and chronic load. You know, you don't need to be in June and July in pre-season up at 6,000, and it would be inappropriate for you to go that high from nothing. We want to see that gradual build up across the months. And this may look different dependent on position or role. So fast bowlers might look slightly different to batters in terms of what these values are. But the same principles apply. We want to see that steady increase in weekly average totals across the season. So this is what we see on our end in AMS. When you've put in your activity across a period of time really consistently, this is the kind of graph that develops on our end. And on the bottom axis, you've got all the dates, so running from June all the way through to December. And on the axis on the left-hand side, you've got the amount of workload that's been accumulated across a 7-day period and also across a 4-week period average. So the line that we're really interested in here is the blue line, because that shows the average across the last 4 weeks, and that's a bit more stable because it is across a longer period of time. But if you just focus on the blue line, you can see that there is a steady incremental increase all the way through pre-season and up to the season. It's not dead straight, but it's pretty good, and it's what we're after. And you can actually see on the right hand side that when you get to December, this player is up at 6,000 units, which is what we want to see leading into a national championships. Now the red line is the 7-day total at any point in time. So, you know, in an ideal world, the red line and the blue line would stay very close together. But in reality, there are going to be weeks where you do more, weeks where you do less, because of maybe activity that you do away from Cricket New South Wales, or illness, or exams, or an off week, or there's a deload in the programme. We'll try and keep those lines as close as possible together, but in reality, there's going to be spikes, and you can see the spikes where there's a yellow exclamation mark and a percentage value next to it, where the 7-day total has gone over the 4-week average by a certain amount, and that's shown with a percentage value. So these spikes, they're going to be unavoidable. In reality, we rarely ever see someone have no spikes in there, and actually, as long as we control it in some kind of way, they're actually needed, because the reality of a cricket season and cricket as a sport is that there will be spikes in workload, because cricket is quite volatile in the way the schedule is, where some weeks you might bat every day and be in really good form, and then other weeks you might not get any runs and you're not doing anything at all. Same with bowling. Weather obviously affects it as well. So these spikes are unavoidable. But the ability to tolerate these spikes is going to be dictated by robustness, fitness, and strength. So generally players who aren't very robust, strong or fit, when a spike comes along, they break down and get injured. The players who are able to tolerate these spikes are players who are strong, fit, robust, and are able to tolerate them off the back of that. So with this particular player, you can see over this period that they've gone through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spikes leading up to December. Now this is before the National Championships has even started, but I'd be pretty confident in saying, because this player has successfully got through these spikes without getting injured, and that's because of how fit, strong and robust they are. If a spike was to come along at Nationals, which is quite likely to, then they're going to be able to tolerate it. So without getting too complex, with the blue line, in summary, we want to see that incremental increase, and these spikes are going to happen. They're unavoidable, but your ability to tolerate them is going to be dictated by your robustness. And then this is what you can see on your end using your JER AMS app. So on the home tab, you'll be able to find this page, and what we've been speaking about over the last 27 minutes or so is your activity, and that's shown on the dial on the top left hand corner. And for this player, over the last 7 days, their activity total has been 1,475 units, and the figure underneath, 84%, shows that it's 84% of their 4-week chronic load. So if we were to look at that graph again for this player, there would not be a spike. The 7-day total, the 1,475, would be sitting slightly underneath the 4-week average. So in a good place at the moment. And that 1,475 units is something that you can keep an eye on as a 7-day total. You know, if you know that you're building up to a certain event or activity, state challenge, national champs, or a weekend of cricket, then you can have a look at that figure and see if that you are going to be prepared for that activity through the activity markers that you've been putting in. In the same way, you keep an eye on that percentage figure to see if you're doing way too much compared to previous weeks or not enough. So that's a way that you can inform yourself and keep your awareness up with where you're at with your physical preparation and workload leading up to the season and into the season. So on to wellness. What is wellness? It's a questionnaire monitoring fatigue, sleep, soreness, stress, and overall wellness, as you know, as you should be filling it in every day. How do you record it? So exactly the same way that you record activity. Go to your app, assessments in the top left hand corner, and then rather than clicking on the cricket ball saying SSM activity, to the right you'll see the wellness tab to click on. So as I said, for activity, even complete on days, even when you don't do any activity, because we still want to know about your wellness. A lot of people always forget to do activity and wellness on the day they don't do anything, but we want to know what's going on in terms of how you're recovering, and try and complete it at the start of every day as well, because that's when it's gonna be at the front of your mind for recording how you've slept that night, how you've rocked up in terms of soreness from the previous day's training. And as most of you know, you just take yourself through the questions one at a time, and please fill them out accurately. It's pretty obvious if you're just clicking through them and pressing 33333 every time. That's giving us very little information, and it's providing you with no information off the back of it. So why do we use wellness? So from a triple SM point of view, so that's myself, physios, it's a way of measuring how you have responded to training and matches when we look at stress and soreness and sleep, and overall wellness. We can actually see how you're responding in terms of your recovery and the training load that we've put on you. And yeah, with point two, it's keeping an eye on the way on how you recover, because if you're constantly reporting lots of soreness, if you're not sleeping well, then that's pretty immediate feedback on how you're recovering, and you might be able to do some things without us actually intervening at all. So yeah, as I said, with you, it's about improving your awareness of how you're responding to training, matches, and other stresses. I know that you type these wellness questionnaires in, and that goes through to us, but if you're putting down that you're sore, if you're putting down that you're not sleeping well, that should be immediate feedback for you, and improving your awareness on how you're responding to training, matches, and other stresses. And number two is introducing you to the way in which things are done at the top level by blues and breakers, because it's what they do. So if you have aspirations of becoming a contracted blues or breakers player, then that's what's going to be expected of you at that level. So you may as well get into good habits and behaviors now. And it's kind of training you into those elite habits and behaviors. And with elite habits and behaviors, I know you're just filling in a questionnaire, but it shows that you're compliant with the training program that we're putting in place. So it does cross over, and normally we see good transfer to the way someone's applying themselves to a training program. So if you are fatigued, if you put down on your wellness questionnaire that you are fatigued, ask yourself these questions on the left. Have you recovered effectively? And there are lots of these infographics floating around, but something like the 100 points of recovery on the right is a nice way to tick off, have you slept well, nutrition, hydrated yourself, have you done some active recovery as well? So have you recovered effectively? Then back to the left, have you fueled yourself appropriately for the session in the way of nutrition? Or are you just fatigued because you had a training day or match the day before and you're not used to that kind of load? If you didn't sleep well, is your sleep hygiene appropriate? And again, there are lots of these kind of infographics around. I won't go through all the points on there, but reach out if you're after something like that to improve your sleep hygiene, to help you sleep better. Or is it as simple as you've not done enough on that day, that's why you're not sleeping well? If you've got up at 11 in the morning and then it gets to 9 in the evening and you're not tired, and you've sat on the sofa all day and played video games rather than actually been active and done something, then it's probably not surprising that you're not sleeping well. And then if you're sore, ask yourself these questions again. Have you recovered effectively? Have you trained effectively in the lead up to this match or competition? So linking back to those activity markers again, have you actually accumulated the arbitrary units to make sure that you're prepared for that training load or match load? Because if you haven't, then you're probably going to be sore. Or if it's early in the season or pre-season, and you've done something that you haven't done in a while, then you're probably going to be sore as well. So that's probably not very surprising. Or if you just haven't done a certain type of activity for a while because you've had exams or there's been an off week, then it's maybe not surprising that you're sore. The example I'll use here is throwing. If you've gone through a few weeks or a few months without throwing, and then you go back into an intense throwing session, you're probably going to have a sore shoulder afterwards. So as well as us getting this information, have a think and improve your awareness around when you answer these questions, actually using that immediate feedback to provide yourself with some information around whatever it is, recovery, for example. And then this infographic on the right, a little bit of evidence around what we've been talking about. Essentially says that stronger and fitter players recover more effectively than weaker and less fit players. So if we're talking about recovery, and nutrition, sleep, hydration are obviously important here, but simply through being fitter and stronger, that's going to put you in a better place to recover more efficiently. And again, that links back to that activity workload accumulation. So in summary, for activity and wellness, make sure that you complete it daily so that the information is accurate. If there are days that you miss off, then you can go back and fill them in again in that activity tab by going to settings in the top right hand corner and then scrolling through the day that you need to go back to. But if you do miss days, then this can leave gaps in your workload information. So we really need you to fill it in as often as you can. Remind yourself of the RPE scale regularly. As I said, it's got a huge impact on how that workload is quantified and calculated, and the difference between putting a 4 and an 8 is huge. Number 3, we will push you if you're not doing enough. So if your activity workload is pretty low and you're putting in the RPE correctly, in the minutes correctly, and we feel like you're a little bit low, then we will give you a bit of a push to get you up there. Or we may pull you back if we feel you're doing too much, and this is normally the case if you're doing other sports or other activities away from here, just making sure that we manage your workload appropriately. Number 5, we might adapt training if we need to intervene in terms of number 3.3 and 4. And then number 6, this is really key for us. We use it to make sure that you are physically prepared for competition, for competitions like nationals and for matches. So we need to know that you're in a place where you can actually compete, and you're going to be able to physically tolerate the workload that's put onto you. So if you don't fill it in, we don't know, and as a result, we may get in touch with your coaches and say that X player has not filled in their workload, so we have no idea whether they are ready for a national championships, for example. We have no idea if they're physically prepared, and as a result of that, we may recommend to coaches that you're load restricted if you're picked. If you're selected, that's great, but we've got no idea from a physical point of view if you've got the capacity to get through that competition. So we may recommend that you're restricted, and this might look like missing days of cricket, having more rest days, or limiting the amount of overs you bowl, as an example. So it's in your best interests to make sure that you fill in your activity and your wellness every day. And as I said, compliance on AMS equals elite behaviours. These things transfer to other aspects of training. We normally see that players who are really good at filling in their AMS or doing their strength sessions or doing their running sessions by themselves and having 100% compliance, they display elite behaviours, and this normally transfers into the way that they train as a player as well. So even though you might not think it matters, it does matter because it crosses over into other areas of your game. That's it. Thank you very much for listening.